So, Deathloop. I'm sure this is a game y'all have never heard of before. This is a game that just came out of nowhere. It flew under everybody's radar. No one knew Deathloop was coming. Everyone went, "Oh my god," when it surprise launched on PlayStation Store and Steam, and no one's heard of this game, so I thought I would just give Deathloop a little spotlight. Nah, I'm just fucking with y'all. Look, I'm gonna keep my thoughts on Deathloop very short, because to be very honest, I don't have a whole lot of interesting things to say about Deathloop. I feel like with this game, I'm caught in this weird middle ground where I really like the game, but it feels like I'm in the middle between these annoying mainstream critics that are throwing this insanely lavish praise onto it, giving it 10 out of 10, calling it's an essential game and all that, and I'm just going, huh? I don't get it. I wouldn't go that far. Like, I really like the game, but to a 10 out of 10 in a world where Titanfall 2 and Persona 5 exists? No. No. I would even argue objectively this isn't a 10 out of 10 game, because there's some like really big problems with Deathloop. Like, the AI is dog shit. The gameplay smoothness is not the best. The performance on PS5 right now, even on the performance mode, is not perfect. 10 out of 10? Really, IGN? Really? GameStop? GameSpot? Whatever the fuck. Who gave it a 10 out of 10 besides it? I think it was GameSpot. Yeah, GameStop doesn't do reviews. So, but then there's also the other side, where there's a lot more seasoned people who have been with Arcane, who are much bigger fans of Arcane than I am, who are saying this is a really big disappointment from them. They feel like it's just a big step backwards after the Dishonored series and Prey, and they're talking about how shallow it is and how unenjoyable it is to explore levels, how they felt like it never was really worth their time. As somebody who does not usually like these kind of games, these roguelite, time loop kind of stuff, it just the very idea of Deathloop on paper just sounds so unappealing to me. But the way Deathloop creates its time loop mechanic and the way it does its roguelite stuff is shockingly forgiving and shockingly generous, that it was able to pull somebody in like me, who's usually not a fan of these kind of things, and I ended up really enjoying it. And if you don't like these kind of things that you think Deathloop is going for, like roguelike elements and the time loop stuff and the fact that you lose progress upon death, I'm here to tell you that this game is far more forgiving and far more linear than I expected. Especially I can't believe, honestly, this is from the same people who made Prey or Dishonored. I mean, besides gameplay-wise and aesthetic-wise, as far as, like, letting the player kind of do their own thing, it's really hands-on as far as guiding the experience in most cases. And that's something that I actually quite liked, honestly. Like, it's... You know, sometimes I like it when a game kind of just lets me go and figure my own shit out. But in a game like this, where you die a lot and you have to kind of figure out how to synchronize all 8 of the targets in order to break the loop, I actually liked that it was this more mission objective based kind of thing that they went through. So I really liked Deathloop. I just thought it was a lot of fun. I loved messing around with the powers. I loved getting new guns that would just make me a badass. I absolutely love one of my favorite power-ups in all of gaming. It's actually, I remember it being pulled straight out of Dishonored 2, if I remember correctly, the domino effect, where you hit an enemy and then it neurally links with other enemies, so whatever damage you do to that enemy impacts the other enemies as well. And I love that shit. And again, I'm not even that big of an Arcane fan. I really like the first Dishonored, but I quite famously did not like Dishonored 2 at all. I really thought Prey was boring as hell when I played it. I probably would need to go back and try it again, but it just did not vibe with me at all. And then Arcane unfortunately got stuck. I think they got stuck working on that awful Wolfenstein spinoff with BJ's daughters. I think they were the ones that got stuck with that, with Machine Games or something like that. And then they're making that Redfall game that just doesn't look very appealing to me. So it's rare that I like an Arcane game. And this, to me, may be my favorite one out of the stuff that they've made, even above the original Dishonored. Because it fits more of my playstyle with Dishonored. I really like Dishonored, but Dishonored, for me, is much more fun when you do the non-lethal route. And I am not a non-lethal guy in video games. I like going around and blowing shit up and causing chaos and having fun. I don't really usually like the approach that Dishonored went with, where it was clearly favored that you do non-lethal and you be stealthy. And that was something that, like, Dishonored was so good that it got me to enjoy that. But that's the way, for me, that it's meant to be played, because there's so much negative baggage with the aggressive style. And this Deathloop feels like a game that's more like my playstyle, where I like going in aggressive. I like going in loud. And sure, stealthy is definitely better in this game, but this game feels a lot better to play as far as like a first-person shooter compared to Dishonored, where Dishonored definitely felt more restrictive. It felt more like a stealth game that happened to have first-person shooter mechanics to it. Deathloop definitely feels more like a good blend of both the stealthy and the loud and banging combat. I know people are probably sick to death of hearing about Deathloop at this point, and that's a real shame considering how much I liked it. But it's also it's a weird game because it's technically an Xbox game that is being held as a console exclusive for a whole year on PS5. And it's a very strange, it's definitely the most weird experimental thing that Bethesda has published in a long time. So I give it props for that. At least, as much as I hate Bethesda now, at least they haven't completely abandoned weird ideas like Deathloop, like the upcoming Ghostwire Tokyo. So that's good, as much as I hate Bethesda. They're not as boring and predictable as Activision or 2K or EA now. But I'll be very interested to see how much Deathloop sells, because I'm sure there's a decent amount of people who are more than fine waiting a whole year to get it on Game Pass when it eventually goes there once that year of exclusivity for PlayStation runs out. And I feel like this is going to become a game where it's critically acclaimed for reasons that I may or may not disagree with on a case-by-case basis. And people are going to sleep on it, though, because they don't want to pay $60 for something like this. And they want to wait until they know they can get it on Game Pass. So I'll be very interested to see if this makes money, if it sells well. If it sells well, then, that's good for, PlayStation will have gotten their money's worth, because they must have paid a pretty good price for this game and Ghostwire Tokyo to be those year-long exclusives. And I can see why Xbox was willing to keep them year-long exclusives on PS5, because they thought, well, technically we had no financial backing in this game. These games were made, they were in development long before we purchased Bethesda. We'll just let Sony have them, whatever. It's not, they're not a Starfield, they're not an Elder Scrolls, they're not a Doom. Hell, they're not even Wolfenstein, they're not Fallout. So, whatever. And Xbox kind of win. It's like they're in a win-win situation here, where their players lose out on this game for a whole year, but this might end up being like a big resurgence of interest whenever it comes out on Xbox next year on Game Pass. So that'll be interesting to see. So as far as now, would I recommend Deathloop? Yeah, I had a lot of fun for the time that I put into it. There you go. I do recommend Deathloop, even if you guys are sick to death of hearing about it.